Right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming. We just want to check apologies for absence. We've had an apology from Joan Henry will be late, but she's coming.
Chair, we've had apologies from Emma Lemon, co-operative member.
Any declaration of pecuniary interest? The minutes of the previous meetings, anyone got any comments on it?
Just on page 4, item 8, I just wanted to check if the children and young people plan, I thought that we were being asked to comment or to provide ideas for the children and young people plan rather than just receiving the report.
Yes, it was an invitation to contribute to the development of the children and young people plan. You'll remember that what appeared last time was just a framework against which we're going to consult. So it wasn't a plan. It was the outline against which we're going to build the children and young people plan. So there is an invitation to contribute comments. This is obviously not the only body that is contributing to the development of that plan. So we're out for engagement work to help formulate it over the next couple of months.
The next item is the Merton safeguarding report, but the chair isn't here yet. So if everyone's happy, if we could move on to the business plan. Caroline. Thank you.
Well, I'm happy, so thank you, Chair, for moving me up the agenda. So you have in front of you the business plan update, which shows So in the September Cabinet, we took an update of the business plan and rolled it forward. So the gaps that we showed when we went to Council in February earlier this year showed a gap next year of just under 800,000, rising to 18.7 million by the end of 22-23. We updated that and rolled it forward and said that by the end of 22-23 we're actually going to have a shortfall of 20.2 million because some of the assumptions that we have around the adult social care grant not continuing. Within that, we have assumed that there is £6.2 million worth of savings already, in my words, banked, and therefore I asked directors to ensure that they can confirm that they're going to deliver on those unless they say that they cannot. And Children's Schools and Families have come forward and said there are some savings that they want to swap out, and they've put new proposals forward, and those are in the appendix in front of you. We also set new savings targets for departments based on the 20.2 million, and you can see at the bottom of page 7 there are new savings which have come forward for this panel as well, which for the children's area totals £550,000. We have the details set out within Appendix 2, and we have the equality impact assessments set out for you in Appendix 3. Cabinet, when they had these savings in front of them, were asked to note the proposals because they didn't have the equality assessments in front of them. So we particularly welcome Scrutiny's thoughts and proposals and comments on those equality assessments in order for us to feed that to Cabinet when they then reconsider the proposals. Happy to take any questions, Chair. Thank you.
I think there's a lot of questions people want to put to Caroline. So initially, if we all put forward one question and if there's time, come back for your second. So, Ed?
Yeah, thank you, Caroline. If I understand the figures correctly, it seems that the bulk of the savings are in 20 and 21. Is that right? Can you say something about why they focused on that particular year as opposed to being more flat throughout the various years of the savings?
So what happens in 2021 is that we have government grants falling out of approximately 9 million. We have been using a reserve to actually smooth the savings that need to be found. That is fully utilised in year, and then the cost of inflation and our capital financing costs amounts to 4 million. That is offset by some council tax, business rates, and some savings already in, but that's the £14 million increase in just overall costs men as a result of the fallout of government grants and reserves.
Yes. Okay. And just to put that in perspective, obviously you've got an overall saving which you talk about as £3 million, but actually if you look at it on an annualised basis year on year, relative to a budget 16-17 which was about 53 million, or 17-18 which was 55 million, the savings, if I understand correctly, from 1920, £143,000 for children, small families, and then £438,000 in 2021-2022, 299 against a budget of about £55 million roughly. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? No one has any?
On anything.
Oh no, on the relating to the budget plan, any aspect of it?
Yeah. Just on the equalities impact assessments, the outcomes, I wasn't clear from reading them through what the different numbers referred to, outcomes 1, 2, 3, 4. So where do we find a description of the outcomes?
That's a very good question. When you're working in this document, they pop up electronically, which doesn't help you at all with a hard copy in front of you, and they're also available on our intranet, which also doesn't help you at all in this audience. But if I were to say that a 1 is this doesn't leave us with any real equalities concerns, and a 4 is go right away and start thinking again, then you can infer that 2 and 3 at different levels of further work needed around the plans to mitigate the impact.
Right, okay, thank you.
I just think more broadly, now that we have got the equalities assessments and we can see that these dramatically impact vulnerable families and people who, if the prevention stuff is what actually saves us money in the long term, how do we square that circle with ourselves that we're not making those savings in the future? We might be saving a couple of pennies now, but in the future those families are going to be struggling and needing our support even more. There's nothing in the budget to say that we can actually support them when they come here. So there is also the dimension of thresholds being raised to get the services that we have. So how do we square that circle?
Well, generally, it's going to be extremely difficult for you to be able to do that when you see the challenge that we've got in 2021. And that's what I said at the training, there's going to be very few savings that we're going to bring in front of you. You're going to go, brilliant, yes, we're going to do that. You're going to have some very difficult choices ahead of you, and it's going to be very difficult to fully mitigate the impact of the savings across all departments and then for all areas. So that's the challenge that local government generally has, because it doesn't have sufficient funding for adult social care or children's social care. So that's the dilemma that we're in, and therefore it's Rachel's judgment in this particular area as to how she does that. So
what I would add to that is that the focus of the majority of our services is on families that are already vulnerable, and the consequence for us is that if we're going to reduce what we spend on those services, we will be impacting on families that we know to be already vulnerable, and we're targeting the impact of those cuts at the least vulnerable end of a vulnerable group in order to preserve the work that we do with the even more vulnerable families within that group, if that makes sense. So there's very little work that we're doing now or funding now with families who don't display some kind of vulnerability. So what we're trying always to do is to make sure that within that group, which has existing needs, because otherwise we wouldn't be working with them, we're focusing and targeting our resources on those that are most in need.
Has anyone else got a question? Do you want to come up? Oh,
Sorry.
And then,
Very good.
Just to say, so if we do suddenly get some money for adult social care because austerity is over, will we be able to protect the children's budget then?
So certainly if you dig a little bit deeper under the charts that were produced for the national budget, it did show funding for the public sector going up, but once you take out health spending, once you take out protected government departments, spending for local authorities is going down. So until we get the green paper, and that's promised in December, we don't know quite what the impact is going to be. But then it does depend on the amount of money that comes forward and the conditions that are attached to it as to whether we can use some of that for children's. Clearly, the children's services now ranges from 0 to 25, so there may be some flexibility in there, but it does depend on conditions that are attached to the new monies that come through.
Yeah, so hearing you talking about how you try to identify the areas that work with the least vulnerable people for savings, that means it's really important that we actually achieve these savings, because otherwise we might be having to impact on other services. So how kind of confident are we? I thought particularly about the ones that are about the social impact bond and the family drug and alcohol court. They're about predicting the impact of preventative services reducing demand. Do we know that that will actually result in cashable savings?
Yes and no. Isn't that a really unhelpful answer? So we track the families that are in those programmes. They come into those programmes because the young people in those families are at very high risk of entering care, and if they're successful in those programmes they avoid care, and as a consequence we can say definitely that we have saved that money that would otherwise have been spent on those children coming into care. What is less visible is the impact that has on the overall bottom line budget of the service. So, for example, I can see in this year that we are avoiding care for some children through both the FDAC and through the social impact bond work. Nevertheless, my service has shown an overspending year. So if you see what I mean, we are definitely making those savings, but we've got pressures elsewhere.
Any other questions?
Probably a question for Rachel really, but given the budget impact and the shortfall, what's your biggest concern?
That we will, in endeavouring to make sure that we reach the most vulnerable and prioritise their needs, miss something or someone who is more vulnerable than we understood or appreciated, and fail to deliver an appropriate intervention at appropriate time.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to question the reduction in some of the statutory education functions and the possibility of legal challenge, which presumably would cost a lot more in the long run.
So once again, we've got very little left now that isn't statutory, and those elements that we continue to preserve are largely around prevention to stop pressure in our statutory services. So what we do know about statutory requirements is that you can meet them in a range of ways, and there's a certain amount of flexibility and room for manoeuvre around what we deliver and still be compliant with our statutory duty. So where we're looking at that, we'll obviously try and make sure that we remain fully compliant with the law while undertaking reductions. But that is a risk for us, and we obviously work that through in our planning.
Because you've mentioned it specifically there, if you could foresee where the legal challenges are likely to be, then presumably that's an area that we're going to look at.
Yes, absolutely.
Anyone else got questions? I've got
Oh, sorry.
I've got a couple. Oh no,
Yeah,
after you.
okay.
No, after you, I insist.
Yeah, just to put it in perspective, actually, that I noticed that to understand the basis of a 17 to 18 account, as we've got Caroline here, they haven't been finalised yet. So a late notice has been filed, and it's not usually, we don't usually see one of these late notices. So, what could you just update us quickly, just so we understand whether these numbers are actually finalised or not yet? Yeah, what's happened with the late notice? Yeah.
So, for those of you who will be attending Standards and GP Committee tomorrow night, then the accounts will be presented, signed off and audited.
Okay,
Yes.
okay.
And certainly the numbers around have not changed. It was mainly our fixed assets and unusable reserves that changed.
Okay. So for the purposes of a capital investment programme, I think in 17 to 18 there's been a spend of about £6 million. Will those numbers remain unchanged for 18, 19 and 19, 20? So I think that number of £6 million goes up 18 to 19, jumps by 10 million to £16 million of investment, and then 8 million further in 2020. I think that largely focuses on the new SEN, special education needs provision, and also the new Harris Secondary School as well, if I understand the figures correctly. So those numbers in terms of the additional investments for the 2 years ahead, jumping from 6 million to 16 million, probably remain unchanged, will they?
For now they do, but
Yeah.
we are looking
Okay.
at additional capital bids that will be coming back to the December Cabinet. and therefore to the second round of scrutiny in January. So there may be some changes to those numbers, but not as a result of the accounts.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Is there a risk in reducing services to schools that more currently local authority maintained schools may choose to become academies, therefore reducing the money going to the local authority even more? To what extent are you worried about that risk?
It's a possibility, I suppose, but it doesn't appear to be the driving force behind current or recent or past decisions to become academy. They've been more based on kind of other incentives in the system, and there are fewer of those around than there were. So I think that, we'll try and continue to maintain a good relationship with all our schools, whether they're academies or maintained schools, and hope that keeps us close. We're increasingly trading with our schools, so rather than being able to provide services for free, making a traded offer, and schools, including academies, are buying back that offer because they value what we deliver. So,
anyone else?
Have you, and obviously children's services isn't the kind of service where you can necessarily raise a lot of money, but have you explored ways of renting out children's centres and raising income that way? Just even though it might not necessarily be groundbreaking amounts of money, it might be a little something we can use for universal care for people.
yes, we already do a lot of that, and we're looking very hard to see what more we can do. So at every stage of this piece of work, we're proposing to raise income if we can, and in many cases what follows is only a reduction in service provision if we can't persuade people to part with their money, either for the service or in some cases for rent. So a lot of our children's centre sites we have co-located other services by charging rent to do that. In some cases we do charge for activities, so where there is provision that isn't targeted at the most vulnerable families, quite often that activity is now charged for. And as I say, we've started trading with schools across a lot of our services, so we do look for income generation a lot. As a bit of an aside, I did a kind of a web chat today. The directors are venturing into this kind of format to talk with our services, and one of the questions that I was asked by colleagues was, how much more can we do around income generation? So as a director, we're taking very seriously and looking for every opportunity.
Thank you. Just to say, Ellie, I do visit schools, and I know there are a few academies who are struggling with their budgets, so it doesn't mean they necessarily get a lot more. My first question is to Caroline on page 46, where you talk about the cutting of posts and the amount of money that's going to be saved. When you then cut the post, you pay them redundancy if you make them redundant. If it's natural wastage, you don't. Does that, with having to pay out whatever you have to pay out, still save money by not having to pay the salary?
Eventually, yes, it will. So there is a central corporate budget for redundancies. So if someone is made redundant, then that is a set calculation that we apply, and that would be paid out, and then there would be a payback then of the salary coming out of the salary budget. So there is, eventually there will be that saving.
And on average, how long do you think that is? 1, 2, 3 years?
I haven't done what the average cost of someone being made redundant is. I can do that and come back to salary.
Just curiosity,
Yes.
but until you get your budget, you don't know. And the other one, I had a query with, in the equality analysis on page 59, there's talking about the working with schools to achieve it, and Jane, I don't know if you read this one. Yes, you did. And it's talking about you require agreement from schools to deliver this saving. What happens if you don't get the agreement from the school?
Well, I suppose that comes back to the trade service conversation. So what we will be doing is working with, particularly through our schools-led partnership, to look at how we trade those services. Up until now we might have provided for free, of which actually there's not, as Rachel said, that many left. and that we make sure that when we're trading, we're getting full cost recovery. So I suppose that's the dialogue we would have with schools if we're no longer able to provide that service other than through traded service. If they don't buy it, then that service will cease.
Thank you. Has anyone else got any questions at all for Caroline before she goes?
How many services are there still that you provide for schools?
That's
It's like many are there still.
yes, because the local authority has a lot of statutory functions in relation to education.
Before I thank you, I know you've got to set a budget that we can manage within our limits, but as Natasha highlighted, it is hitting vulnerable children and children at risk of sexual exploitation. And I watched, I don't know if anyone saw it on Monday night, Doing Money on BBC Two at 9 o'clock, and it is harrowing, and it's a factual-based drama, and it's what brought in the sexual slavery law, I think in 2014, into Ireland, and then it came into England, and that's what worries me. I know, Rachel, you're saying you're trying to get the least vulnerable of the vulnerable, but there are times when we don't know always which ones are vulnerable, as the Dagenham and Barking research has shown, and I think it wrenches all our hearts, quite frankly. And is there any hope of getting any more money anywhere from central government? Can you put any lever in, Caroline? I have high regard for you and think it possible.
But I suppose we haven't given up on the possibility that there might be more forthcoming, and the way that we are trying to work towards achieving that is by contributing information to the spending review. So we've agreed to provide information to CIPFA to support their representations to central government in the context of the spending review. We'll also be working with the Children's Commissioner's Office to do that, and we've already contributed information to the Association of Directors of Children's Services and to London councils, all of which has the underlying aim of making a case to Treasury for why children's services are so important, both for children in their present lives, but also to prevent further demand and pressure on services in later life. If you do right by children now, then they grow into healthy adults whose well-being doesn't need to be taken care of by the state. So there are very good, I think there are moral and ethical reasons for doing this work, but there are sound financial reasons for investing in children as well. So we are working hard to contribute the information to make those arguments.
Yeah, as you raised the question of government financing, I think just two things to note from your numbers. First of all, the business rates retention of understanding, we're now generating an extra £3 or £4 million a year over the, I guess they're on 100% business rates retention currently, is that right, as part of the pilot? Yeah.
Yes.
And also the government has announced in 2020 there will be a full review of government finance. So we know that's in the pipeline as well for what will be the critical year.
And I suppose that part of the challenge is the distribution of the cake, and if there's going to be any more money in the cake, because certainly there are quite a few organisations, authorities across the country who think that London is particularly well funded, and certainly that's been part of the challenge, that we have to get our voice heard, both sort of nationally and within Parliament itself. So some of the issues that Rachel's mentioned, there's also some conversations going on direct with ministers around the pressures also on our schools funding, and particular pressures that's having on us, and therefore the indirect impact back on general fund services, because the grant is meant to be fully funding school services, and it's clearly not in quite a few authorities now, and that number of authorities is growing. Some of the lessons from Northamptonshire are also being played back into government, and there's a cross-party or cross-departmental working group working with the commissioners who've gone into Northamptonshire County Council to see what the issues are. And then there's also the fact that East Sussex is putting itself on notice that it is nearly having to issue a Section 114 notice. And as Rachel told us, that's a service with an authority with an outstanding education as children's service from Ofsted. So if they are now failing, then there are sort of wider issues for the sector as a whole, which we hope that government will take into account.
Anybody else?
Can I thank you, Caroline, for what you've presented, and for Jane and Rachel for your input in it. We know your hands are tied so much, and we're hearing austerity's over, so hopefully the money will be coming through. We pray, we hope, and gratefully we'll receive it, and then situations can be dealt with. But thank you for what you're doing and keeping such a tight rein on everything. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. We're going to move on now to item 4. Keith's not here.
I think we have to assume we make it and that there was some kind of misunderstanding.
Yes, okay. So that's starting on page 7.
Chair, we do have Julie Hesketh here from the CCG, who's a key safeguarding partner, and Civic paper.
Do you want to speak on the paper at all?
I can give input from the health point of view, so
Or to answer questions?
I'll try and answer
Do you
questions.
want
There
to
are
pull-
other people from
pull a
children's
chair up,
services,
so- You can join in. That's lovely. Thank you very much.
I'll do my best. I wasn't expecting to present it.
No, that's fine.
I'm
No,
happy to introduce it.
thank you. All right, we'll have Rachel introduce it. And Julie, if you can answer questions.
Yeah, that's okay. I'll do my best.
Thank you. Thank you.
So colleagues, I'm very grateful to my Children's Schools and Families colleagues for being here, and Julie likewise, because this annual report refers to the year of the work of the Merton Safeguarding Children Board from 2017 to 2018, and you'll have noticed that I wasn't here for that year, although I had joined Merton Council by the time that this report was finalised and agreed. So I'm very well aware of the content of the report and the very good year that it covered. It covers a year during which Ofsted inspected our service, found our service to be good with outstanding features, and one of the outstanding features was the Safeguarding Board itself. So it's been judged to be an outstanding safeguarding partnership, which is greatly to its credit. The core members of the partnership, obviously the council itself, our colleagues at CCG, the police, we have representation from schools, the wider voluntary sector, and numerous other partners. And all of us joined really with one ambition, which is to keep Merton's children and young people safe. So what you have in front of you is a report which outlines the business plan of the board for that year, and the action that we took in respect of that business plan and the successes that we had during the course of the year in keeping Merton's children safe. And I don't think in terms of introduction I will not say any more, but very happy to take questions on any of the points of detail in the report.
Has anyone got questions?
I think just, I haven't got a microphone, but I generally don't need one. I think to say, I do think it's a good reflection of what's happened over the year that it takes into account. It is well written, it's not too wordy. Sometimes you get annual reports which you just can't make, it's just too much jargon, so I do think it's quite user-friendly. Kate's opening remarks at the beginning I think are quite helpful, because they do give you the focus on the paper. And if you were to look at any areas, I think if you look through that, then you can see where you've had the best performance over the year and the things that have really been focused on. The contribution from health, I think, is evident within the paper. But what the paper doesn't do, quite rightly, is it doesn't pick out the functions of each of the partners. It does it as a partnership, the way that we work in partnership. So I can see health throughout it, but I don't think it stipulates, oh, this is health, this is social care. But I think that's a good reflection of the working together and how we do that. And we've been able to, it's been able to be presented in that way. So I'm happy to answer questions. I know we've had some challenges in health over the year. And I think when you look at the report, it's good to see that those challenges haven't meant that there's been a detrimental impact on any children in the borough. So I think that's a good reflection. I'm happy to say what those challenges are if people want me to, and the things that we're looking at within the CCG. So one of the first things earlier on in the year when I started as well was the initial health assessments for looked after children. We had some concerns about the timing of those assessments taking place, and the initial health assessments are done through our local provider, our acute provider, sorry, and then the other health assessments are done through the local community provider. We've done a lot of work with the host who manage Epsom and St Helier and with our local provider to get those numbers in a much better place, and I think if you saw the performance data you would see that has improved now, and we don't feel we have such a problem with that, albeit we're always assessing and checking that, but we have been able to change that risk even on the CCGs as registered. The other challenge that we've had, but again it hasn't had such an impact, is that we've had a named GP for safeguarding children vacant for the whole of this period, and I think the work that the designates have done within the CCG has picked up some of the functions of that role, but that is still a vacant role at the moment, and I'm happy to say that we've got interviews set up in a couple of weeks and we've got 4 really strong candidates, so I feel fairly confident that we'll fill that role this time, but it has been vacant for nearly 2 years. Mental health and wellbeing across the whole sector is an area that I think we're all concerned about for young children, and it is a focus in this paper. But we've just had our governing body today in Merton and Wandsworth, and there is a piece of work that our chair is doing around children and mental health, and working in partnership with the local authority and the local providers. I think at a future meeting we should probably bring an update around that work as well, because it fits very well with what the priorities are within this report. So that's all I was going to say, but I'm happy to answer questions if I can. There's a few of us that might need to help out.
So questions, Amy?
Hi, I'm just wondering what actually will happen with the report. So who is the main target audience for the report?
I was going to say the board is required to publish an annual report, and it's public. So the audience is the residents of Merton and also the wider world.
Okay.
And it will go to the health CCG governing body as well. So it will be published on our website as well.
Okay. Obviously, I have actually read through the report, and I did actually thought it was very well written. So thank you for that.
Okay. Oh, sorry, Dennis. Sorry.
No, I haven't got any questions.
Oh, you haven't, sorry.
So in the report it says that you'll be moving towards becoming a safeguarding partnership, and I was just wondering, is there extra funding and resource to help that happen?
No. So I'll speak on health for now. It's a question I can't really say today what that will be. We contribute at the moment to the safeguarding board. Clearly, from all of the local authorities, there's going to be a challenge. If we're an equal partner, there's a view that we put in an equal amount of money. We hear that, but from a health point of view, we currently don't have additional budget either, so that is a discussion that we're going to have. But it isn't one that we've had yet. I spoke to our accountable officer today. She knew I was coming tonight, and her current stance is that we don't have additional funding at the moment. So that's all I can probably say today, but I hear the challenge absolutely. If we're Wandsworth view is if we're an equal partner, then we all, the 3 partners, pay a third of the costs. But I think we need to have some discussions about that. I think we have to also acknowledge, and I would say this, that from a health point of view we have a lot of designate posts as well that we have to fund. So our contribution to the board is part of safeguarding, but we also have doctors and nurses in our organisation that are statutory posts that also need to be funded, and I think that's just something that we probably expect to be taken into consideration. But yeah, I hear the question.
Anyone else got questions?
I think that Ofsted highlighted the access to health records for care leavers, didn't they? Has that been addressed?
Yeah, so that was one of the 4 recommendations that Ofsted made, and that issue was resolved within a matter of a few weeks, so that's now working well.
anything else away from this report, I would really recommend Appendix 1, which is the business plan from 17 through 19, which sets out the Safeguarding Board's goals, who's responsible for them, and tracks progress against it. So it's a really good benchmark for the work that the board's doing, and we'll continue to review.
I'm sure we've all read it, I know. Any other questions from anybody?
Yeah, sorry.
No, you go.
Right, yeah, I was going to ask, obviously you had your Ofsted report in assessment in 2017, you got a great result in that, that was terrific, came out as outstanding, so the Safeguarding Board, I think, is doing a great job. When is the next Ofsted report scheduled for, and are there any areas of specific concern which you're worried you've got to give it a special focus on, if you like, just to make sure you retain that outstanding level?
I don't know if they tell us when they're coming back.
Do you know?
They don't tell us when they're coming back, and the inspection regime's changed slightly, so we don't anticipate having a future inspection of the safeguarding partnership arrangements. That's not currently built into the inspection framework. So we were inspected in 2017 under the standard inspection framework, which ran for about 4 years. Every local authority in the country has been inspected against that, and we fared very well. We're one of the best authorities in the country under that framework. They've now moved on, and their inspection arrangements for safeguarding also looked after children are under a new framework called the ILAPS framework, and that won't look in the same way again. So it'll be very difficult to kind of benchmark the next inspection against this. There are also, I should say, other inspections that Ofsted undertakes, some of them jointly with partner inspectorates, something called a JTI, a Joint Targeted Area Inspection, which is undertaken with the inspectorates of health, the CQC, and the police, depending on the theme of that inspection. We also anticipate a SEND inspection, an inspection of our provision for children with special educational needs and disabilities, and Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Probate will undertake an inspection of our youth justice work in due course as well. So there's plenty of inspections to come, but we alas don't know when.
It was just in the report it mentions about engaging with fathers when it comes to child protection issues, and I was just wondering if you could give us a kind of brief overview of the kind of work that you're looking to do in that space.
So the issue about engaging with fathers is important for several reasons. One is sometimes fathers get screened out, particularly around things like domestic violence and domestic abuse. Practitioners sometimes don't want to go and talk to the father because of the issue. So we don't tend to hear fathers' voices in those contexts. And often when we're bringing children into care, the evidence is that practitioners don't always go and talk to fathers. But what we know from the research is that it's really important to engage with fathers, and fathers often have something really important to offer to their children that gets missed in the assessment process. So the work that we will be doing will be kind of related to a number of things. Family Rights Group have done quite extensive training and work with a number of local authorities over the years in this particular area, and I was lucky to be involved with them in a previous local authority, and we really managed to increase the engagement of fathers. So the work we'll be doing will primarily be training. We do have some current support available for fathers at Bond Road, so we'll be looking to extend the kind of offer around bringing fathers into our kind of assessments, but also in terms of how we support them, because the sort of range of support you need to provide for fathers is different from how you might work with groups of children, or to some extent with groups of mothers. So because you really want to focus in on their parenting role, so it's got a slightly different stance to it. So yes, I mean that's the sort of range of things we'll be doing.
Building on from that question where they've identified further development areas, how are we addressing those other points that have been noted in this document?
So there'll be a range of work undertaken across our system. So the three priority areas identified by the board really relate to areas where we think there's a need for kind of whole systems development. So that's in the area of early help, so our early help offer. Really thinking about families, so part of the father's work fits into that because that's thinking about the whole family, including the wider family. So within children's social care, for instance, we're looking at we're embedding a practice model which is very much involving and bringing the whole family into how we find solutions, and that's done very kind of pragmatically. By talking to families about their support. So this is really to try and do two things. One, it's to address the issue that sometimes happens in safeguarding, where you get very focused in on the problems and get very focused in on the kind of abuse and neglect, and don't think about what the family sometimes has to bring to the table, particularly the role of grandparents and uncles and aunts, and even family friends. So the practice model is intended to try and address that. And we're doing some work currently to draw on some evidence which has come from Canada and the United States that it's actually very easy to build those networks very quickly. Sometimes in the course of an hour, you can bring in a much wider group of people to help the family find a solution without necessarily having to rely upon professional responses. And that's better for children because it's people they know, and it's better for the parents because it's people they trust and know. So that's kind of that's one dimension of it. The other dimension is related to the fact that because of the sorts of issues we encounter in safeguarding around adult problems, particularly things like substance misuse, parental mental health difficulties, adult learning difficulties and disabilities, that we need to join up the working across adult and children's services. So in particular to try and help adult practitioners think about children and think about the family, because sometimes they're very focused on patients, medication, diagnosis. And the reason we want to do that is because we know if we do that and we manage to achieve it, it means that there's more people thinking about children, and there's a lot of evidence that if professionals can work with the whole family, that the outcomes for the child and for the parent tend to be better, so that their mental health improves, because parents with mental health difficulties are parents first, and they're people with mental health difficulties second usually. So we're doing quite a lot of work with adult services at the moment to try and join our services up better. And then the third priority is the contextual safeguarding issue about adolescent vulnerability. And that manifests itself in different ways. I mean, obviously the big concern at the moment is serious youth violence and knife crime. So the board's taken a real leadership role across the system to try and help the system think about how we can engage and work with those young people. Obviously the vulnerability that's been mentioned around child sexual exploitation. So we are looking across our system to think about how we can work as a partnership to address the needs of those children. I would say, and I think this is the strength of the board, it's not the question of we just have good meetings. The partnership work around all of these areas is good, and it's strengthening. Sorry, is that me? I apologise. Oh, it's an alarm. Sorry. Probably time for me to stop. So I'd say the kind of partnership and work around all of those areas is really good. So, for instance, we brought all of our work around adolescent vulnerability now into one panel where we have colleagues from the police and health and children's social care and youth offending all in one room, talking about the needs of all of those children with vulnerability, and it's helping us both gather intelligence but also improve our approach.
Thank you.
Sorry, anyone else?
Anyone else? Any more questions? Just got a couple. Partly we've discussed it briefly, but on page 32, 33, could you kindly explain to the panel illegal schools? Because I don't know if that everyone understands what they are, because I know I didn't. And also on page 33, when it's notification of unregistered schools, are they the same or are they different?
Yeah, that would be the same. So it's where someone is running an educational provision, they're not registered as a school with the DFE, with Ofsted, so they're not inspected, so effectively they're running something that's illegal. So sometimes those provisions will start off by delivering some tuition, and that might be after school, or that might be for particular groups. So one of the groups we particularly keep an eye on is children who are electively home educated, because actually you may have a number of children who are electively home educated, but they are actually then attending an educational provision and what is then called an unregistered or an illegal school. So we will work with our colleagues in neighbouring boroughs, and if we are concerned that there is such a provision, we will go out and have a look at that provision, and if we then think there's an illegal school running, we inform both the DFE and Ofsted, and they will then come out and do spot checks and inspections. And so we've worked locally around 2 of those recently, where there have been children not only from Merton but from other boroughs who've been attending there.
And the school, does they move around?
That is the case for some of them. That's exactly what they do. They move premises then and continue to offer that provision, but from a different premise. So we have to, which is part of the reason for making sure that we work with our neighbouring boroughs, because if we alert each other, then we can pick up where there's children on. Yeah, and we have a really good relationship with Ofsted around that. So, and when they actually then take legal action, they will come back and check with us which children were there, when they gather their evidence. So we feel that particularly in the last sort of 12-18 months, it's been a much faster response from the DFE and Ofsted in terms of that, and a really good working relationship. And we've fed that back within our termly meetings that we have with Ofsted about how well we feel that's working, and they feel they're working well in partnership with us.
Thank you.
But just in terms of enforcement against the illegal schools, have we managed to bring about any criminal prosecutions at all for people who are actually running these illegal schools? And certainly, how many civil enforcement notices have we managed to issue in terms of parents and requiring their children who may be attending these schools to actually attend a proper named school? So on the criminal side and on the civil enforcement side, can you give us any statistics at all that show a level of enforcement?
Probably not off the top of my head,
yeah.
But I suppose in terms of actually closing the schools down, then it wouldn't be us that leads on that. That would definitely be Ofsted and the DFE in terms of taking that process forward, because they've got to demonstrate it's an illegal school. So we have quite a robust process in terms of electively home educated children. So if we feel that the education being provided is not adequate education, is not appropriate education, then we will take enforcement action and insist that they attend a school. In terms of the children that were at those provisions, I don't know off the top of my head. I don't know that, and that wouldn't necessarily have been the way it went if actually the provision they were getting otherwise through their parents was. So it's to be slightly more complicated than just whether they were attending, and they may then choose themselves to go back into another provision. So we would work always to try and get the parents themselves to go rather than take enforcement action.
Is everybody happy? Thank you very much. Can I just say, Julie, I found it a very positive report, and it was a delight to read and hear of so much that you're doing for people in our authority as well as others. And without naming anywhere, I'm sort of an advocate for a parent going through a bad time, and the child is in another borough school. And the head teacher said to the parent, "You're so lucky you live in Morden." So, that's high praise indeed, and I thought I could pass it on. Thank you very much. Item 5 is restricted, so if we can go on to cabinet members' updates, starting with Caroline, please.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Chair. I think most of the updates we had in here were covered last time, and I think, I'm not sure whether it's been quite four weeks since the last meeting, but Harris Academy we have in here, and it's going to planning this November. I think we covered that last time. Cricket Green expansion was also covered extensively last time. I think one of the biggest shock for me is Wimbledon Park offset inspection moving from outstanding to requiring improvement.
No,
Sorry,
Wimbledon Park. Wimbledon Park is outstanding schools. 2016 inspection, not the one school, yeah.
Yes, sorry, but that's a correction, yeah. But also to add to what's in here, we've been talking about vulnerable children as well, and I went to visit the People's Referral Unit, the PRU, on Monday. And usually when I go to visit schools, one of the biggest issue is how many students we have, because this school will not be full. Of course, that's a very big issue. And for this school, there were some classes that had only 2 students. But of course, that was very positive, so I was very pleased. I had to ask a question and thought, of course, that's very positive because, this is, vulnerable children are being referred to this school. So to have a school like that have only 2 students in a class, or some, I think the most I saw was, 4 students in a class. And that was very good. But it also showed how hard the teachers are working there. They really work so hard to provide the services that those children need, to give them the support that they need. And I just want to commend them and commend the officers as well for the work that they continue to do for our vulnerable children in Merton. And as the chair herself just said, that someone mentioned to her that someone's child was lucky to be in a Merton school. I think I've said again and again that whenever I visit schools, the head teachers are always very enthusiastic. The teachers are really working hard, but also they always commend our officers and the support that we provide for them. And so I just want to reiterate that. When it comes to the savings, I'm happy that Caroline dealt with that first because I wanted to mention it, but it's heartbreaking when we see that services being reduced, especially to early years. I think Natasha mentioned that also because I think we need to be supporting early years and really encouraging them and doing the best we can do for early years students because obviously as they move up, hopefully they'll be better prepared. But if we start reducing services to them, then, what do we expect when as they get older? And that's why we need, the government to support school to actually provide the fundings that we need. But it is heartbreaking, but, like there where we are at the moment. But thank you very much, that's all.
Thank you.
So I'll just follow on from Caroline slightly in discussing, I wanted to bring a few comments about the savings forwards. I'm glad that we have the opportunity to discuss this now. And as you'll have seen, some of the savings do align with the constructive steps that we're taking to better align with our MSCB priorities, including early help, vulnerable adolescents, the Think Family approach, including buying into the social impact bond and the Family Drug and Alcohol Court programme. But others are due to the persistent underfunding of children's services, and I do hope that as part of the funding review we do see an improvement in that area. As we're already a high outcome and low cost council comparatively to some other CSF departments, it is going to be really difficult. I don't want to portray children's services in Merton as playing the victim to Tory cuts. Thankfully, Rachel has already highlighted the proactive and very constructive steps that we're taking to work with some groups such as the Children's Commissioner's Office and CIPFA, which, for those who don't know, is the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy. I did have to Google it to find out exactly what the words were, in which order, but there we were, in order to actually properly lobby for fair funding. We need to ensure that when we review the savings, we do think about the users of these services first. And so I really implore you as a scrutiny panel that sits separate to you have a responsibility to review the savings with a financial hat on, but first and foremost, your obligation, as is mine, are to the children of this borough, to the young people of this borough. we are all corporate parents, our colleagues are corporate parents, and it's your opportunity between now and when the report comes back to really think about the impact that these have. I know I will be doing that, and I hope that we can have further really full and frank conversations about these savings, because they are going to be difficult and it is important. On a slightly more lighter note, I just wanted to review some of the points, some of the things that I've been up to since the last meeting. Since the June one, we had a good sort of 2-3 months between that one and now, but there's only been 3 to 4 weeks between our last meeting now. But in that time, I've been to my first Violence Against Women and Girls meeting, and we're preparing for the 16 Days of Violence. 16 Days Against Violence. Well, starting on the 26th of November, where we will have educational courses and a stall in Merton College, and there'll be events running from here. And I do urge you to look out on Twitter and the internet as to what we'll be up to. I've also been to visit the Acacia Children's Centre and Brightwell's Children's Home. We then had the launch of the Healthy Early Years London programme with the Mayor of London, which was really successful. And I think when we were there, one of the funders of the scheme came around and said that they really thought that Merton was one of the best places to have your children. And I didn't prep her to say that. It wasn't part of any briefing or anything. And I really do think that having seen that centre, she felt like, you know, she travelled to Paris and looked at their early years schemes. And so that's something really to cherish. And then yesterday we had the Start Well planning session for the Health and Wellbeing Board. There'll be another set for Live Well, Age Well, and then In a Healthy Place. Obviously, as Children's Services, I went to the Start Well one, but I'm looking to go to all the others as well, so that we can make sure that children are properly represented throughout the life course, and especially in a healthy place, as we know that we're going through quite a lot of changes in the built environment in Merton, and I think that's really important. So I apologise for that being a bit long, but thank you for giving me the time.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Has anyone got any questions for comment?
Can I just make an observation, and Caroline, thank you for your update on Children's Services. And I suppose, just from my point of view, for this panel, just to really remember the journey that Merton schools have been on of improvement, and that when we're looking at cutting and the budget difficulties, that actually what we don't forget is the key people who are delivering the services, because what's been key in Merton, what I've seen in Merton compared to the other 12 local authorities I work across, is actually a lot of this has been built on relationships and trust and confidence over time, where officers have given challenge, but realistic challenge and support as well, and that is built around people. So word on the street, certainly in our church schools in Merton, is it's a good place to be supported, and it's retained that school improvement service. And there is a danger when we're looking at plans and we're looking at posts and we're looking at and talking about services that we forget to talk about the people and the quality of people who are delivering. So I think we just need to hold on to that, because I've seen examples in other local authorities where they've retained services, they're trying to sell services back, but the quality goes because of the recruitment processes and the people who deliver it, and then you don't cut the customers buying. And it's exactly the same whether they're community schools, voluntary schools or academies. So I just urge you to keep an eye on that really as a panel.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else? Questions?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. If I could, just on the subject of the Ofsted inspections, obviously I think the people at Merton want to be certain that the leadership of this council and the cabinet knows what is actually happening when there is an Ofsted inspection, and you know which school we're talking about, but also if there is a substantial downgrading in the Ofsted grading of a school, and by that to be, you know, there's a school in the west of our borough which unfortunately moved from outstanding down to requires improvement, and it was a great concern to the residents of West Wimbledon. But I think there was a lot of concern out there that the leadership of our council and the cabinet itself of this council had no idea that that had even happened as an Ofsted downgrading. And to this day, today, some 2 months later, doesn't even know which school it was. Wimbledon Park, of course, is an outstanding school, but I would like to set up a process whereby this panel, as a scrutiny committee, and the Cabinet are formally briefed every time there is an Ofsted inspection, and on the day, so the second it comes in, if there is any issue of concern, we know it's happened, and we know there's been a downgrading. Otherwise, there's a great concern among residents that the Cabinet and the leadership of the Council doesn't actually know what's happening with regard to the Ofsted gradings of the school.
We did touch briefly on this before.
Can I-
Rachel.
Can I say something first?
Okay.
Sorry.
On the point of process, we do brief when we're able to. So the outcome of an inspection is confidential until the report is due to be published. What was interesting about the last time, and the scrutiny panel got, and the Cabinet member got an apology from me the last time we met, because the school itself released the report ahead of the embargo. And you will see if you go onto the Ofsted site that the report was published on the day after our scrutiny meeting. So you all got a full apology from me for that oversight, but really I couldn't have briefed sooner, because the report wasn't supposed to be in the public domain at that time, and I hadn't anticipated that the school would go ahead and put it on its website. So I reiterate again my apology to Councillor Cooper-Marbiah for that, because I wouldn't have put her in that position last time we met for anything, but I was absolutely wrong-footed by it. More broadly, we make sure through the School Standards Panel that Ofsted inspection outcomes are evaluated through the panel and understood, and the efforts that we're making to support schools who receive a poor inspection judgment, but more crucially, schools about whom we have a concern before they're inspected, form part of the termly review under the terms of that panel. So that's how we keep fellow officers and councillors aware of what's going on for our schools.
Caroline, did you want to?
Well, I wanted to also say that, apology for that error, but I am briefed when schools are inspected, and we have the school improvement team that monitor the schools and provide challenges for them and aware of what's going on in the school, and they are aware when they're having difficulty, and they try to support them. And in this, on this occasion, it didn't work, and I know there's some occasions where it don't work, but we are providing the support that the school needs to make sure that they get back up to where they belong.
Sorry. Obviously, with that recent issue that had arisen, is there any lessons that could have been learned? And is there anything whereby we could have been slightly more proactive to have stopped it, having to get to the stage where we're only ready having to do something because of the Ofsted report?
So we were aware that school, we did have concerns about that school. Our process, if we have concerns about a school, is that we would work with the head teacher and chair of governors to put in place a support and challenge group. That school did have a support and challenge group, so we were already aware that there were issues. However, in Ofsted terms, perfect storm in that the head teacher had just left, the deputy had just left, and the chair of governors had changed. So when Ofsted came in, it's a completely new senior leadership team, if you like, in terms of answering those questions, and so that would already raise some questions for Ofsted around leadership and management. So I suppose lessons to learn, maybe we could have pushed back more and said, don't come in at this point, because actually it's a new head teacher and needs time to, but the problem is the timing of that was just unfortunately a perfect storm for that school. I mean, had Ofsted come in probably a term later, 2 terms later, the end of that year, it may well have been a completely different outcome, but it was just at the point when we came in, it was unfortunate, if you like, in terms of timing, but it certainly wasn't that school wasn't on the radar, we weren't already working with them, and that support and challenge group continues now, because obviously they're an RI school.
Anything else anyone wants to add? I would like to say it's very clear, Rachel, last time it was a shock to you that it came out, and Omar, you were checking on your phone about it. Yes, but it it wasn't sort of the usual method, so it was a bit of a shock to everyone. And if the school does that, there's not much you can do about it if you don't know they've done it. But I understand, because it's in your ward, your concerns, and you're right to raise them. So thank you for that. And thank you.
Obviously the school standards panel is a very important panel, because that's the panel which drills down into the detail of the Ofsted report. So where the school does have a downgrade in the Ofsted level, then the school standards board or panel will meet to discuss the matter with the head teacher and meet the chair of governors and so on. So I know it hasn't met for quite some time, but I would very much like that school standards board to meet as soon as possible and track the pipeline of the Ofsted inspection. So then I'm sure we'll be meeting with the school as soon as we can to discuss that Ofsted inspection report and see what we can do to improve and make sure they have a proper plan of improvement in place.
Do you want to come in, Jane? Oh, I know Dennis has got it.
So at the moment we're just trying to, we're liaising back with who's the chair to make sure we've got to take the what's there. So if we, so it is a bit delayed. If we don't manage to get one before Christmas, we'll have 2 next term. That's how we'll deal with it. And what we usually do is look at 2 schools who've had an inspection in each meeting, so that over the course of the year we look at 6 schools in depth, and we make sure that the panel looks at a range of schools that have got a really good Ofsted outcome, those that have got a less good outcome, so that actually the panel gets a feel for what it's, goes out into school visits prior to the meeting, so they get a more in-depth feel for what's going on in terms of Ofsted.
May I? Yes. As I may have said before, I've been on that panel for 16 of the last 17 years and chaired it several times. And before Jane came, Jan Francis, they were dealing with one school who were struggling but weren't listening. They'd gone in, all the members of staff had put them, and Jan asked me as chair of the panel that year, can you go and talk to your friend and try and ask him to listen to us? And he was a friend of mine, but he didn't even listen to me. So what I'm saying is, if the schools and the school governing body aren't listening to the local authority, what can you do? Because the first time I was interviewed by an Ofsted inspector was mid-90s, and I've been interviewed several times since then of different schools. And although the inspections are getting shorter mostly, they're much more professional. The first time I knew more about what the conversation was about in the Ofsted inspection. Now they are very, very bright people. They're probably that anyway, but they really know their business and they really dig deep. And the fact that we have got such a success and a progress is a compliment to the schools and the local authorities. Thank you.
Okay. Right, thank you very much. We're going to move on to item 7 on page 91 of the report.
So this is for me to introduce. Ordinarily speaking, we would have our head of policy, partnerships and performance introducing this report, but it was his last day with us today, so we decided that he really needed to stay for an evening meeting, and we're in the process of recruiting a replacement. So you get me. So there's very little to say about this report because we met so recently, and therefore there's not been very much change in the last few weeks. There are a couple of things though that I would mention, which is that we would ordinarily in the departmental update now have the RAA. We agreed last time that the development of the regional adoption agency would form part of the departmental update. Nothing has moved on that since the last time we spoke to you about it. The paper that you saw last time goes to Cabinet on Monday next week. And so if you were wondering at all why the RAA didn't appear, it's just that there's literally nothing to say, but future departmental reports will of course include it. And then you've just got a little teeny tiny update to those areas where we think that there has been a little bit of change and movement, more considerable coverage of children's centres, just because that's a busier update. And councillors, I think, are concerned about the planning committee. So the Harris Academy had originally intended to go to planning in October, it's now going this month. That is still the intention, and we're very optimistic that that will get through. If it is agreed at planning, then we are on course to open the doors when we expect it, although it will be very tight. If it doesn't go through planning, then I think we'll all be scratching our heads every time. Those are the kind of the principal issues to draw to your attention, and it's largely a no news update this month.
Ellie or Haley wanted to add anything to the data? Yes, ma'am.
No, we had a chat about this earlier this week. We didn't feel there's that much movement really, to be honest with you. I think the key areas of concern are the same areas of concern that they were last month, and that's as far as well, I can see. Ellie agrees that that's been addressed in the report. Yeah.
So, questions on the department update report?
Sorry, I was looking at it within the same line. I beg your pardon. Yes, if you've got any questions, anybody, that's all right. Off with you first.
Did anyone want to go before? I was just going to ask about Harris Wimbledon, as that's in the departmental update report. Obviously, there's some degree of concern among local residents that this school has been built in the middle of an area where there's very busy roads, and air pollution is a very big issue. Well, we're also concerned about it's going to be a building site as well for about a dozen years with the redevelopment of High Path. There's some concern, of course, that the schools may not be in the right place, but just in terms of air quality for a school at that location, and I don't know if our director can answer this, or she may need to go to Tom Proctor, I think manages the build contracts and things like that. But in terms of the air filtration system for the air in the school, will it also include the carbon filter systems to pick up the NO2 pollution, or is it purely restricted to what you call the HEPA filters for the particulate matters? So I think I've got two questions. Are we going to have a proper air purification system that picks up the nitrogen dioxide in terms of carbon filters, and will the HEPA filters be suitable to pick up the PM 2.5, which the local residents are very concerned about as a matter of air quality?
I definitely can't answer that question. I'm looking at Tom Cross-Taylor. Are you in a position to provide any information, Tom?
Well, I can't answer the absolute detail and technicalities of it. It's a building project to be managed by the ESFA, but it's clearly going through the planning process, and I know that our air quality expert in ENR has looked at the application very carefully. The planning committee report was actually published this afternoon, so you can look at the detail of that to get a thorough answer and a thorough assessment of it. But the conclusion of it is, yes, whilst the surrounding area has pollution, they're satisfied that the school itself will satisfy all requirements, isn't a danger, and of course it will prevent a lot of people travelling further along the polluted roads by going to a local school.
It's in my ward, so obviously take a close interest in this. And I went to visit Merton Abbey recently, which is the school next to where the school is, the proposed school will be built, and talked about exactly this issue and what can be done about reducing the pupils' exposure to pollution. And we had some of the council experts and some of the GLA experts there. And we were talking then about how actually those filtration systems aren't actually the best. There's not much evidence yet that those kind of artificial filtration systems work very well. And what's much more effective is just having things there's lots of evidence about how pollutants kind of dissipate quite quickly when you get away from main roads where there's particularly idling traffic. As they're doing with Merton Abbey, they're looking at what they can do to reduce the pupils' exposure there. For example, I don't think this is confidential because it's done to a few councillors. They're considering temporary closures of streets, of the high path streets around school drop-off and pick-up time, which has been trialled in other councils. And if that works, then I don't know if that's a proposal that could be extended to the secondary school as well. Because contrary to what's going around a lot on social media, it's actually the High Path which is the bigger issue rather than Ranton Way. Ranton Way is a main road, there's lots of free-flowing traffic. The High Path is lots of, it's a small road and lots of cars that are coming and kind of stopping and starting, which is actually a big issue. But yeah, I just wanted to update that Merton Abbey are looking at things to reduce pupil exposure, but will also benefit the school. Thank you.
Could I just add to that? I don't want anyone sort of thinking that pupils in Merton Abbey are dangerously exposed at the moment. As part of that, the pollution guys did do some tests within the site of Merton Abbey, which I guess is dissimilar to Harris and Morden, and everything was within safe levels. So it's the highways around it rather than actually on the site itself. So let's not think that the pupils in the school are actually have dangerous levels on the school site itself.
How is that tested? So how is that tested? Sorry, how is that actually tested in the school playground, for instance? So what measures, just for everybody's understanding, how do you know that's the case? What's used to be able to measure that?
Okay, again, it's outside my exact expertise, but there's a series normally of special machines that basically measure those rates of the various pollutants, and we have them across the highway network. I think there's at least 20 points throughout the borough, and those were brought onto the school site specifically for that reason, because these concerns have been addressed, and because Merton Abbey has been chosen as a special project in partnership with the GLA, and we're in a number of schools across London. So it's special equipment. It's not it's properly done through special equipment. I don't know the detail of it. It's not subjective measure. It's an objective measure of the various pollutants.
We had one successfully used in Lower Morden to do with an industrial estate, a particular business that they felt was polluting the atmosphere, and we even had a resident offer their garden to be one place to put one of the machines to measure it. So they take a bit of time, but they were effective.
Is it possible to actually get a copy of this report? Where would I get that from? Just the one from the Merton Abbey. I just think it'd be interesting because there's so much conversation with residents about this. I would really like to read that, see when it happened, see what was used, and just educate myself personally at least, so that I can actually see a copy of that, because it's public information.
Can you just answer? Is that possible to get from?
I don't know who currently holds it, so I'll follow that up.
I mean, let's be absolutely clear on this. All that data is publicly available. It's in the Merton Air Quality Plan, it's in the annual report as well, and you will see the diffusion tubes that measure nitrogen dioxide very clearly set out in Ranton Way, Morden Road, Merton High Street, as well as the permanent monitoring station. And if you look at those readings, the legal limit, of course, for nitrogen dioxide is 14 micrograms per cubic metre, and all of the readings on all those three roads that surround that whole school area are in the 40s, 50s and 60s, and they are over the limit, and it needs to be understood that there is a very serious problem there, and it needs to be a priority. There needs to be an urgent course of resolution action to address it and consider it. So I don't think I've never seen a statement saying there's a diffusion tube which is to be placed inside the school. All the tubes are just surrounding the local roads, and all of the readings are extremely high and above the legal limits of the ones which I've seen. So the Merton Air Quality Plan and the report, and that's where you'll see all the readings are publicly available on our website.
Yeah, right. It hasn't been done before in schools. It was just done as a special exercise on a certain day as part of the project I just described. So you're absolutely right. As a routine, they are not located in schools like they are located on the highway network.
Briefly, so that's publicly available information. That the Mayor of London's report on Merton Abbey is publicly available. You can go and take a look, and we've got that information because Merton and the school collaborated with the GLA and their consultants. And whilst you're there, that you can look at reports from other schools in other parts of London. So whilst I completely agree that the nitrogen oxide levels on the Ranton Way and Morden are very high, if you pick some of the schools that are in Lambeth and Southwark, oh my gosh, they had minor back streets that are at the level that our Morden Road is at. So if we're worried about pollution at Lancaster, as we should be, then compared to other places just a few miles down the road, where actually it's not so much of an issue.
I thought, sorry, I won't debate it as much rules as debate it, but I thought that the Mayor of London's report was based on the monitoring of the streets surrounding, and it's the first time I've actually heard that this is actually because of the results of that then we've actually moved those on to the side to the school, and that would be really interesting to see that. So I thought purposes that was okay. But now that report would be really interesting to see.
I wonder if I could ask Tom, as there is quite a bit of concern about this, is it possible for you at a future date to come to us and talk to us about this in more depth?
I think the appropriate person would be Jason Andrews, who is our pollution guy. We can certainly come along with him. I mean, as I said, it is a significant planning application consideration, and I'm sure it will be discussed in considerable detail next Thursday night when it goes to planning committee. But yes, certainly we could certainly ask him also to attend this committee on this.
I think
and see if he's willing to.
Would people like that?
Yeah, because not just about him, but it affects other places in Merton as well. So
would you want generally a report on schools, or I don't wish to. I mean, this has obviously become an issue because of the new school, but
I think it would be including the new school, but how it affects schools in Merton. Yes.
Because I mean, there is a specific section, I think, of the new air quality action plan on covering schools, so you can certainly cover that aspect.
I think that would be good for us to have, please. So could you liaise with Stella to arrange that? Is that all right? Thank you very much.
Yeah, sorry, Chair, are we suggesting that the planning decision be adjourned and put on hold then whilst it's
No, goodness me, no. The planning goes ahead. This is for us as a separate committee. It's nothing to do with that. You're welcome to go to the planning meeting. When is it, Tom?
Next Thursday.
Next Thursday, week Thursday, you can go and listen to it. Anybody can. You can go in there as an observer. But I'm talking about us as a separate committee and in no way impacting on that, Caroline.
Sorry, Chair, just in case if it helps, but even before this whole planning, many people were asking me about the air quality in the area, and so when the consultation was held at, about the school, I went there and I put that to them, asked them a question about air pollution and what they're doing about it. On the plan, they showed me that there will be a long fence, from Merton Way, because many people are saying that there where the pollution is coming from, but there will be a long fence along Merton Way. There will be trees, and then followed by the back of the building. So whatever air pollution that is coming from Merton Way shouldn't really impact on the school. And also they will have some filters in the ceiling of the building, and so therefore the air that's coming in will be filtered. I mean, I'm just saying that because I think, we are all concerned about the health of our children, and I wanted to find out what they were doing, to improve the air quality for the school. And so I just thought I'd mention that.
No, thank you. And do we know how many trees are going to be planted around or in the vicinity of the school?
Certainly could not say that off the top of my head.
There was a very interesting article I read about the activity of trees at night. And something about they give off 48 pounds of oxygen from what it was quite. So that does help improve the whole issue.
You're absolutely right, Chair. There is a line of trees that divides the Merton Abbey Primary School and the new site for Harris Wimbledon, and that whole line of trees is going to be, unfortunately, chopped down.
Well, they could put some new ones
That's the
up.
council's plans at the moment.
But the plan is that they're going to have trees there, so maybe they will remove it for whatever reason for the building. I don't know, but the plan, what they told me, will have trees.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions?
Just an observation, Chair, really. It's all good talking about planning that. It's actually again the point of delivery and the quality of the build, and the SFA don't always have the best track record of delivering. So I'll just throw that into the mix. So actually, it's a monitoring of the build and future plan that's in there that's most important, isn't it?
Yeah. Thank you.
So I would just like to say that I'm genuinely concerned about the air quality for all of the schools in our borough, and I really do hope that once we get that report, it does show that our children are at risk. You and everybody else on the council will support any measure we can do to reduce carbon emissions and all the really harmful things coming out of exhausts and things like that.
Would you advocate building a new school in an area known to be a pollution hotspot?
I think we're sort of going on now and getting a bit embedded where the decision's being made. It's all right, it's going to planning, but you've raised your point, Ed, and that's fine. And Tom is going to get someone to come back to us on it. Thank you very much. Right, I did squeeze in item 8 with 9 because I felt they married together, and to look at the work programmes. There's on page 7, the performance report itself actually. Sorry, Rachel, I beg your pardon, the performance report on page 97.
So again, this one would usually, we'd be led through it via partnerships, but we do have Kelly and Henry who would engage in that conversation, as I understand, about performance support. There's not a lot of movement since last time, but I'm happy to take any questions on it that you might like. I don't know whether either Henry or Amy has anything that they wish to add at this point.
As Katie said, like there's not been much change. Nothing of interest.
Just one brief question. Obviously, the figure that's missing is October 18. So at the moment, things like Ofsted inspections, we're saying we've got 91% which are good or outstanding. So given the change from the Ofsted inspection in October, is that going to include that change, or is it?
Doesn't include that change.
That's post change.
Any other questions? And the work programme on page 99, has everyone noted that, please?
I did, which was just an acknowledgement that at our last meeting we had a request to bring the 9th Crime Action Plan onto the programme. We haven't yet set a future date for that, I don't believe, so it's kind of done around with many other boards and committees, but I'm very happy to when we hear it's simply a decision about when we want to timetable it.
And just before we finish, after last...
Can I just ask, just based on that, when do we plan to bring it here? Because I think particularly with everything that's happening both in Merton but across London, you know, rather than discuss when, you know, approaches happen to bring it when it can be
We don't
here.
squeezed in. It's something that deserves decent timing. I don't know. Rachel, could perhaps we look at when it might be easiest to fit it in? Is there anything that perhaps could be put back? But I doubt it.
It's a little bit up to members and what members want to see. I mean, we've got a busy agenda on the January meeting date. We've got Sir Daniel Moynihan and Sarah Musgrave from the Harris Group attending. That's an unusual request, and I was pleased to see them accept it. So I think that's a commitment we would want to honour. There are routine elements of that agenda, such as performance monitoring and department update report. I wouldn't want us to slip the corporate parenting annual report. I don't think that feels an important element of children's.
No, I don't think we can.
So the alternative is to see it on the 13th of February, which is a slightly quieter agenda. I mean, you know, you have a busy work programme, so you're always busy, but we could certainly bring it in February.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I was just going to ask ahead of this. So, yeah, I think it's absolutely brilliant that we got when coming to the meeting. And I think the aim of that is we focus on the new school, but we are going to talk more broadly about how this work in Merton, I hope. I just wonder if there's like any useful briefing or update that we can get ahead of that about when they took over the schools they took over and what performance of it. Just, you know, a bit more background information so that we can make sure that we're scrutinising them. I don't know if that's what I'm doing.
We haven't specifically had a...
That wasn't what was on the... So it was just going to be the school.
That was what they've been briefed on implementing.
but that wasn't really working with my values. I remember when we were initially having this levels, and I remember thinking it was going to be a very major player in our education system and running a lot of our schools now, and that I thought it was going to be much more. Because about the new schools, not much to say.
I think it would be perhaps unfair to spring it on them at that meeting when they're coming, but it is something we could bring forward, because I know that with the academies there is a lot of debate about how they kept their results as they were, and I know I got shot in the head a bit bringing up at one meeting, because they've got the BTEC, it counted as 5 GCSEs, but that's been abolished now. They cannot sort of produce better exam results by using the BTEC scheme as it was then. Jane, you know far more about this than I do, I'm sure, but it has been changed so that there, and I think you'll find the results sort of dipped in comparison to other schools after this happened.
But there are other things that they can do. Just this week, Harrods were named as one of the academy chains, still doing a fair bit of off-rolling. And I'd like to want to say that's an issue.
The worst record in England for off-rolling. But that is public knowledge, and there's the data to support that.
Yeah, and new data just this week.
There is.
It does say that they will actually be covering some of the Harris Federation model for guaranteeing good and outstanding schools in the work programme already. But it also mentions a visit this month, potentially for us to go to.
Yes, that's right.
I don't know.
I haven't got a date yet, have we? Yeah, no, Stella, I have to say, Stella is doubling up at the moment.
Okay.
So she's got 2 lots of scrutiny to do.
I was just making sure that's up to something.
So, no, please, Stella, I'm very respectful. She's very organised and on the ball, but she is a bit stretched. She had a meeting last night till 10, and now she's sitting on it. But still going to organise it. So, if we can put that, thank you.
Okay.
I thought I recollected that we said that we would push the visit date back so that the visit was closer to that particular scrutiny committee when we had Harris attendees. If I've misremembered that, I'm sorry.
Okay.
But I did think the push around that was happening in November had been reduced because we were having...
Perhaps that just needs to change on the plan then, that's all. You know, if that's the case, it's just with that in mind. I do think the topic of life grade is very important. I mean, would everybody, with team playing, you can ask these questions sometimes. Would it not be better to just extend the meeting on to it so we can cover it in January?
Well, we said about the February one. I'm very relaxed about the timing. If the panel it's because the action plan is owned by the Safer and Stronger board. It's already been completed. It's already being enacted. Multiple different partners are engaged in that piece of work. So this isn't about the timing for us to produce anything. So if the panel wish to have that discussion at that point, then we can add it to the agenda. It doesn't generate new workload for us.
What I would like to say, one of my friend's sons was married a year ago, was Ed, you are as well, and it's been quite an emotive year for us all, especially for the family. But the boys from Rutledge, because he'd gone to Rutledge, and they'd lost 2 in 1 year, with not both studying, so. But the boys from Rutledge, they funded the headstone for Loney, and when I went to the year Thanksgiving service for him, they put forward they want to achieve something to prevent life crime, and this group of black youths want to work to stop knife crime. And Siobhan is working with Sally, that's the mother of Loney, and putting in touch with trying to form some sort of group, and Joan's been involved as well, she's met Sally, in Merton to work with youths vulnerable to perhaps knife crime. Now, Loney didn't know the boy who murdered him, he didn't. And at the trial they never found out the reason why, and there was no remorse, they don't know at all. But these youths do want to do something, and I don't know if we could perhaps, I mean it's a starting point, but it's something that's been born by our local youth, whether asking for some feedback from them of what they're doing, I don't know how they'd feel about it, but it is something that's going on.
I don't know, I mean there is a huge amount of work going on. We can absolutely shed a plan. We could investigate further what other things are going on and see what else we can bring forward. I certainly don't think we can do that for January, but I'm very happy to look at what's out there and how we might be able to involve young people in it.
Maybe with all that in mind, maybe February is probably a better date then, just give that little bit of extra time. And then not leave things around when you've got the space of the agenda.
Is everyone happy with that?
Yeah.
I'm wondering whether or not we would invite the young men who would like to accept a Christian for one of our meetings.
That's what I was just saying. I can't remember his name. I know he's at the Thanksgiving service. I can't remember his name.
Visited for us, and one is university.
That's it. Quite a few from all.
Yeah, we had a meeting, and also I had spoke about getting involved in meetings all over police officers also. So where we need to get some more information on how to talk about setting up what he wants to do.
Can I make a further suggestion, which has just come to me, so it might be a bad idea. But we had a really successful first children's scrutiny in Local Democracy Week, and that was focused on the theme of crime. And those young people were very actively engaged in that debate. I'm absolutely not trying to derail or sidetrack this conversation, but I wonder whether you'd be willing to consider whether a follow-up young people scrutiny on this theme might be a really good way of engaging young people around this.
I think it's vital to engage. How do you?
It's a good idea, anything. Yeah.
Is anyone got any other points they wish to make? Right, thank you very much. Sorry. Yeah, it's fine, Jim.
To come back to your point about having the information at Harris, I mean, certainly we could pull together something that said this is when these schools became Harris Academies, and it's in the public domain, the outcome, so we could just pull a briefing together that just gave you that overview of the other Harris schools come to that meeting in January. That would be helpful.
If you think it's not appropriate for quizzing them on that, then that wouldn't be. I suppose
I don't know that it wouldn't be appropriate to ask some questions generally about the outcomes in other Harris Academies if there aren't any new ones. No, I don't think that would be appropriate. I think what we were thinking was to ask them to produce something to come in January might be, but we certainly could do a briefing and obviously let them know that that's what we've sort of put it in content.
I don't want to produce lots of extra work.
I do struggle with this one a bit with the Harris Morden update because you've got the purpose and intended outcome, which is really clear, which is very practical things, and then on the right, the possible external visit and that by Sudan, which looks as if it would become a sales pitch. And I don't think the two are sort of matching up for me, because actually the first one is about point of delivery and all the things you wanted about continuity, all the concerns that were raised in the development of Harris Morden. And looking on the right, the briefing I think needs to be very key. And there are issues, aren't there, that we've seen across London with offloading of students. And actually we're putting a spotlight on one academic provider when there are several in Merton that you should be looking at maybe. And I know that's probably throwing a spanner in the works.
Well, Colin, I actually think if you feel, you obviously do, there are several in Merton which should be looked at. It's something that should be discussed with Rachel, Paul and Jane.
I suppose what we did was we responded to the original work programme agenda setting discussion where the request, which is quite an unusual one I think, was made, and it was specific in relation to Harris, and the focus of that conversation, as members who were part of it will remember, was very much on Harris. And I don't disagree that there are other questions for the Academy Trust, and one could shape the work in various different directions, but we followed the lead of that conversation and made that request because that was what members decided that they wanted in the work programme at this stage. And so I'm open to the prospect of doing a different piece of work at a later date. I think this is a very busy work programme this year, and so I would caution against broadening the brief for January.
I think they're quite right on that, but it's we've got up to, is it the March one, whether it could be, if you could make a note of it, and it's put on an agenda after that date, or after March? Yeah, after March. It would be, yeah, that we could have a look at. But no, I know there's a big report out about off-rolling, and academies are the biggest schools.
And it is Pan London issue about off-rolling and other schools that don't off-roll, often local authority schools that then pick up those children in the progress. So it's about this panel having transparency around what validated results really mean against the range of indicators. On our monitoring report, the secondary exclusions, does that include academies? Yes, thank you.
Is everyone satisfied? Right, thank you very much. The final agenda is item 5, school provision report, which is restricted, so I'm asking members of the public to leave. Thank you for coming though.